Today we're going to talk about Tesamorelin. We're going to break this video up into 4 parts. Part 1 is going to be the history of this medication, why it was used, and some off-label use. Part 2 is going to be the chemical composition of this medication, how it relates to GHRH, growth hormone releasing hormone, and how it relates to Sermorelin, a medication we use here all the time at Steele Health and Hormone Center. Part 3 is going to be the research surrounding this medication, and then part 4 is going to be best practices, namely, how can we maximize the pros and minimize the potential cons. But before we get into this, as always, this is not medical advice. This should not be used to treat or diagnose medical conditions. This is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Now let's get into part 1, the history of Tesamorelin. Tesamorelin was developed by Theratechnologies. It's a Canadian company. They partnered with EMD Serrano to basically bring it to market. So it's been in market in a brand name Egrifta since November of 2010. It's been around for a long time, and its original intent was to help HIV patients with lipodystrophy, which is more or less when they accumulate visceral fat because of the antiretroviral medications that they're taking to deal with their HIV. Visceral fat obviously has a ton of problems. It's associated with heart disease. It's associated with insulin insensitivity or insulin resistance. So if you can get these people to have less visceral fat, obviously not only is it going to improve their health outcomes, but it can improve quality of life as well because nobody wants to have a big gut. In addition to the on-label use, some off-label use is to increase GH and IGF-1. Increasing GH and IGF-1 has a lot of benefits. Obviously, like we talked about, decreasing visceral fat, but it can also have cosmetic benefits, increased hair quality, increased skin quality, increased nail quality, and you can have deeper sleep, faster recovery. There's a reason why people take this medication off-label, but understand that it does have a brand name, Egrifta. It's still in circulation. It's being used today. So technically, legally, 503A compounding pharmacies should not be producing Tesamorelin. Now, does that mean that they aren't producing it? That's not necessarily what it means, but generally speaking, people think it's easier to ask for forgiveness than it is to ask for permission. So I actually found a letter that the FDA sent to a compounding pharmacy. It's a good pharmacy still around today called Tailor Made Compounding LLC. It's titled Warning Letter, case number 594743. So they got in trouble for a couple different things. Basically, the FDA came in, kicked down their doors and did an inspection. But I really want to draw attention to this section right here. Section B, failure to meet the conditions of section 503A. So there are tight regulations on what 503A compounding pharmacies can and cannot do. So reading this, during the inspection, the FDA investigators noted that drug products produced by your firm failed to meet the conditions of section 503A. For example, the investigators noted that your firm compounded drug products using follistatin, GHRP2, GHRP6, Endurobol, AOD 9604, BPC 157, PT 141, cerebrolizin, IGF-1 LR3, ipamorelin, melanotan 2, all the good stuff. The FDA basically came in here and was like, hey, shut this down. So understand that if you are getting this from a compounding pharmacy, yes, the compounding pharmacy is licensed by the state, but the FDA may catch wind of this, kick down their doors, and then the river may run dry. So you can get this legally, but you probably have HIV and lipodystrophy. You can get it illegally, but I'm not saying that you should do that. But now that we understand kind of the history of Tesamorelin, why people use it on-label, off-label, whether you can legally get it, let's talk about section 2, the chemical composition of Tesamorelin, how it relates to GHRH, and how it relates to a medication that we use all the time, Sermorelin. Before we get into exactly how Tesamorelin works, you need to understand how your body produces GH and IGF-1, because then it's going to make way more sense. So I made this video called Sermorelin Deep Dive or something like that. I'll link it at the end. And this is the chart I use to help you understand Sermorelin or Sermorelin. I don't care how you say it. But this is how your body naturally produces GH and IGF-1. I titled it Regulation of Growth Hormone and IGF-1 Pathways. So your hypothalamus is going to get a signal. Fasting, sleep, exercise, this is endogenous production. This is how your body naturally makes it. That signal then hits the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus produces GHRH, growth hormone releasing hormone, that passes through the hypophyseal portal and hits the anterior pituitary. That's another portion of your brain. The anterior pituitary then has a GH pulse. The GH circulates through your body, Some of the GH is going to hit the liver, the hepatocytes on the liver, and then produce IGF-1. Now, there is a negative feedback. So if your GH and IGF-1 get too high, that's basically going to go back to the hypothalamus in circulation, and the hypothalamus is going to produce GHIH, growth hormone inhibiting hormone. That then goes through the hypophyseal portal, tells the anterior pituitary, hey, we need to lessen the growth hormone pulse. So basically, it prevents the pulse of growth hormone to make kind of a complicated thing much simpler. Now, that's not the only thing you can do. If you are eating a lot, if you're very stressed, if you're not getting enough sleep, that can also inhibit growth hormone production. But this is the general, very, very basic understanding on how your body produces GHRH. Now, how Tesamorelin works. It steps in for GHRH. So it acts like GHRH. And that's a little bit beneficial because you can still preserve some negative feedback. You're going to get a more robust impact. I'll explain why here in a bit. But it's not like just manually cranking your GH with exogenous growth hormone. So there is some regulatory pathways there, and it could result in less side effects. That's a little bit of speculation, but when we get into the research, you'll see that the speculation is well-founded. Now, I wanted to compare this not only to your body's natural GHRH, I also wanted to compare it to Sermorelin, a medication we use all the time because we legally can use it all the time. So I made this chart right here. Functional comparison, GHRH, what your body makes, versus Sermorelin versus Tesamorelin. So you can see right here, we're gonna get right into the length. So GHRH is 44 amino acids. Tesamorelin is also 44 amino acids. Now, what's the difference? We go to this modification right there. The modification between Tesamorelin and GHRH is the lipid group at the end of it. So that more or less acts like armor and extends the half-life. And since you have a half-life of 30 to 60 minutes, instead of 5 to 10 minutes is what your body naturally produces, you're going to basically activate the pituitary to produce more growth hormone and therefore downstream more IGF-1. Again, just because you're acting on the anterior pituitary longer than your natural GHRH. When you compare that to Sermorelin, Sermorelin is basically a fragment of GHRH. It's a peptide analog. It's not as complete, so it doesn't have as robust of an effect on blood work. That's not to say it doesn't work. It's just to say, based off of our experience and some of the stuff I've read, Sermorelin is okay. Tesamorelin is much, much stronger. Now, the legality between these things. Obviously, you can't make your own natural production illegal, so we're just going to skip over that. Sermorelin, Tesamorelin. The legality of those two. The difference is Sermorelin is no longer in production. There is no brand name production of this. So instead, compounding pharmacies can legally produce it. I believe it used to be called Giraffe was the brand name. Again, that's in the video. I'll link at the end. But now it's no longer in production, totally allowed to be used. Tesamorelin is still in production, brand name Egrifta. So you can't legally produce that. So not only is Tesamorelin stronger, it's also not technically allowed to be produced by compounding pharmacies. Now that we understand the chemical composition of Tesamorelin, namely, it's almost identical to your body's natural GHRH, except it has a prolonged half-life from that lipid armor. We understand how it works, we understand why it works, and we can compare it to Sermorelin. Let's actually dig into part 3 right here, the research surrounding Tesamorelin. So the first study we're going to look at is this right here. It's titled Effects of Tesamorelin, a growth hormone releasing factor in HIV-infected patients with abdominal fat accumulation, a randomized placebo-controlled trial with a safety extension. So I'm not going to read over all this. We'll go into the results. We'll look at the raw data. But more or less how this worked is they had two groups. They had their, obviously, placebo group and they had the treatment group. The treatment group was given 2 milligrams of Tesamorelin every single day for 6 months. At the end of the 6 months, they took the placebo group and put them on Tesamorelin, and then they took the group that was on Tesamorelin and either extended it to see the safety, to see the results, or they put them on placebo. So it was basically a year-long study to assess safety and how it changed body composition. These are the results right here. Visceral adipose tissue, VAT, decreased by 10.9% in the Tesamorelin group versus 0.6% in the placebo group in the 6-month efficacy phase. Trunk fat, waist circumference, and waist-hip ratio improved with no change in limb or abdominal subcutaneous fat. So this really did a great job targeting visceral adipose tissue, visceral fat. Insulin-like growth factor 1 increased, but no change in glucose parameters was observed. So that's very important. Oftentimes, people start to worry about their actual insulin sensitivity when taking things like GH and IGF-1, because that can have a metabolic shift and could potentially lead to insulin resistance. That's a huge explanation, but just understand that when your GH and IGF-1 go up, you may be able to preferentially burn fat, but you may also have additional glucose circulating in the blood, which can have some problems. But in this specific case, we didn't see any glucose insensitivity when taking 2 milligrams subcutaneously every single day in HIV patients with lipodystrophy, basically lipohypertrophy rather, so an accumulation of visceral fat. Getting into this, patient rating of belly appearance distress and physician rating of belly profile were significantly improved in the Tesamorelin versus placebo-treated group. So basically, how they felt about their appearance, they liked it. Obviously, you lose visceral fat, you're going to like how that looks. The drug was well tolerated. Visceral adipose tissue was reduced by approximately 18% in patients continuing Tesamorelin for 12 months. The initial improvements over 6 months in visceral adipose tissue were rapidly lost in those switching from Tesamorelin to placebo. So it wasn't long lasting. After you stop the medication, you stop getting the benefits of the medication, which makes a lot of sense. Conclusion, Tesamorelin reduces visceral fat by approximately 18% and improves body image distress in HIV-infected patients with central fat accumulation. These changes are achieved without significant side effects or perturbation of glucose. Now, let's actually dig into the raw data here. So I found this, they had the 6-month, they had the 12-month. I mean, the 12 months just basically extended on this, but looking at the 6-month raw data right here, there's a couple lines I want to pay particular attention to. One of them is the visceral fat adipose tissue. So as measured in square centimeters, you can see the Tesamorelin was 186 with some variation, placebo was 195 with some variation, and you can see a significant change. So negative 21 centimeters squared in the Tesamorelin treated group, whereas just negative 1 centimeter squared in the placebo group. Major relative difference, 10.3%. Another thing I want to look at, and they didn't mention this in the actual conclusion, but the lipid levels. Triglycerides started out in the Tesamorelin group at 239 with some variation, the placebo group at 223 with some variation. We saw a pretty significant change and increase in lipid profile in the Tesamorelin treated group. So we see negative 22 milligrams per deciliter with some variation in the Tesamorelin treated group, and the placebo actually saw a relative increase with some variation. So I don't know, the p-value is only 0.1, so obviously that wasn't enough for them to make a significant conclusion, but it trends in the direction, and this makes sense, as you lose visceral fat, your lipids improve. At least your triglycerides do. And I also want to look at this line right here, biochemical measures of IGF-1. Again, if your IGF-1 goes up, you can pretty reliably say that your GH went up. We're going to look at another study that specifically looks at that in healthy individuals. But IGF-1 started at 146 with some variation in the treatment group, 149 with some variation in the non-treatment group. And what you can see is that IGF-1 increased by 106 nanograms per milliliter on average and went up by 3 in the placebo group. So a significant change, relative difference of 80.1 nanograms per milliliter with strong significance. So 0.001. Last line we want to look at is the glucose. So you can see across the board, very little changes in both the treatment and the placebo group. No significant p-value there. Now, the last part of this study I want to look at is this right here. This is from the conclusion, how does Tesamorelin compare with other strategies to reduce visceral fat in HIV-infected patients? Neither metformin nor lifestyle modification, including thrice weekly exercise, significantly reduced visceral fat to the degree of tesamorelin. But these strategies improved markers of glucose homeostasis, whereas tesamorelin was neutral to glucose. Effects of tesamorelin on lipids are stronger than that seen with metformin and lifestyle modification. Body image was not assessed in response to metformin, and or lifestyle modification was significantly improved in response to tesamorelin. So tesamorelin does decrease visceral adipose tissue. It can improve lipids, but it's neutral on glucose. It seems like metformin and exercise still have more of a robust effect. So, we'll get into this in part 4, but you should probably not just be doing drugs that can improve your physique and not doing anything else. Why don't you just exercise with it? But now I was on the FDA website. Took me a while to dig through this, so do me a favor, like the video, subscribe to the channel. But I found some data on healthy individuals because most of the people watching this video don't have HIV. At least I hope you don't. So I found the effects of tesamorelin on healthy subjects. So right here, you can see the actual growth hormone spike on 1 milligram and 2 milligrams of tesamorelin. So linear plot of mean plasma concentration of growth hormone at 1 milligram and 2 milligram. So you can see on the left side, this is the 1 milligram table. So you see a nice little spike right there. But the 2 milligram is much higher. So it's probably tough for you to see, but it looks like it peaks right around, I don't know if that's 10,000, whatever their metric is, versus the 2 milligram group peaked at almost 14,000 of whatever it is that they actually were measuring, the actual metric. Mean serum growth hormone concentration time profile in healthy subjects. So it absolutely works. Reading this line right here, growth hormone production as expressed in terms of area under the curve was approximately 68% higher following administration of 2 milligram dose when compared to the 1 milligram dose. The maximum growth hormone release was 38% greater for the 2 milligram dose than the 1 milligram dose. So 2 milligrams is what they used in the actual study that we went over, and that does seem to have a more robust effect. So there is a dose-dependent effect of this medication. Last thing I want to look at, again, this is directly from the FDA website, the IGF-1. So they did it over 14 days. You can see the mean. So what they started at 183, day 7, 322, day 13, 378, day 14, 383. So there's some standard deviation in there, but more or less, when you were taking this medication, I believe this is the 2 milligram right here. Yeah, 2 milligram dose. It robustly increases your IGF-1. It robustly increases your GH. And that's why people use it off label that don't have HIV, because that's what they want. So just the very short cliff notes here, it works, okay? Tesamorelin robustly increases GH and IGF-1. It can reduce visceral fat. It's been shown in studies to reduce visceral fat in people with HIV, but we can probably draw the conclusion that it may also do that in people who don't have HIV, just based off of the robust growth hormone response and IGF-1 response directly from the FDA website and people taking tesamorelin that are healthy. So finally, let's get into part 4, best practices, namely, what can you do to increase or maximize the benefits while minimizing the potential cons? Best practices, this is going to be based off some research, some user experience, and also wild speculation. But like I said, this isn't medical advice, so take it with a grain of salt. The first thing you need to understand is that the research, these people were using 2 milligrams per day subcutaneously, and they saw major improvements over the long term. Now, they weren't using 4 milligrams, they weren't using 6, they weren't using 8. I know how so many people are with like PEDs and like gray market peptides. They're like, oh, 2 is good, 8 is even better. And maybe it is from a growth hormone and IGF-1 perspective, because we can see there is at least some dose dependency based off of the actual response that your body has to it. But is it just as safe? Is it going to have, the same impact on your glucose 4 milligrams a day as 2 milligrams did? I don't know. I don't think anybody knows. So if I were to take this, I would do 2 milligrams a day because that's been shown to be relatively safe. The second thing to understand is you got to understand your underlying pathologies. Okay, this is a huge debatable topic that, you can talk to a million different people, you get a million different answers. So when you're basically encouraging cell proliferation, basically the division of cells, is this going to be a good thing for cancer? I would err on the side of caution. Some people are like, oh no, it has no impact on cancer. Some people are like, oh, it's going to definitely cause your cancer to continue to metastasize. I don't know, but if I had cancer, I would not be taking this. The next thing you need to understand is that, and I say this in every video, these medications should not just be a stand-in for health. Like, I'm just gonna do these drugs and do nothing else. So you can see that, yes, it did improve things like your triglycerides, your visceral fat, but it had a neutral impact on glucose. So why not just take the plunge, use it as a catalyst for change, not a stand-in for health? Get your sleep, eat right, exercise, make sure you're doing things to actually, some effort to actually further your health with this stuff instead of just taking a shot and sitting around. That drives me crazy, although I know a lot of people do it. And then lastly, sourcing. Okay, where you buy this stuff, I mean, people buy it from all over. So some of the guys I talk to in the gym that do a ton of peptides, they have their sources and they swear by it. And they're like, oh, it's third-party tested, you got nothing to worry about. Okay, is that true for every batch? I don't know. Okay, I don't do street drugs, but some people do street drugs. Vet your source. Maybe you can even get it from a 503A compounding pharmacy. Just understand that they are doing something illegal and the river may run dry. Does that mean you're going to get in trouble? Probably not, maybe, but probably not. But they might get in trouble, in which case they might get shut down, they might get fined, or they might request it back. So sourcing this stuff is going to be a little bit harder unless, you know, you have AIDS or HIV rather, and you're getting the actual name brand. But I hope you don't have HIV. I hope you're very healthy. So do me a favor, guys. If you learned anything in this video, like the video. If you're interested in content like this, don't forget to subscribe. My name is Alex Wallace. I'm the owner of Steel Health and Hormone Center. If you want the white glove approach to TRT, HRT, go on my website, Steel Health and Hormone Center, center spelled re.com. Fill out a contact form. We will be in touch within 24 hours. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next video.